What's up guys, Agent here again with another build video, and today we're talking about the Templar healer. So still one of the strongest healing specs in the game, one of the most desired healing specs in the game. Templar healers are still a mainstay in any game vet trials group, whether that's a score running group or a progression style group. Very powerful heals and very good group utility. It's the only source of minor sorcery, so for groups with Magicka DPS, having a Templar in group is really important for that minor sorc bonus to your DPS, and it is the most consistent source of minor reach and minor fracture through Power of the Light, surpassed only by Stamina Templars. But as we will discuss in the Stamina Templar DPS video, even that is sort of kind of going away a little bit because of changes made to Power of the Light. So, just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. Now, because healers kind of fit into that support role in Elder Scrolls Online, we will be taking a lot of time to discuss the different sets you're going to want to have on hand, as well as the different abilities that you're going to want to learn in order to flex out pretty much all the different possible scenarios where you might be healing. So, there's going to be a lot of sets you might want to run, and a lot of different abilities you're going to want to have on hand for various scenarios, because again, your job is to support the group to the best of your ability in a given situation. And then we will not be doing a parse because obviously healers do not have DPS parses, but instead we'll be talking about the philosophy of healing and hopefully kind of get you guys a little bit of insight as to how I approach healing and how healing is approached from an end game perspective. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start here first with our gear. So again, this is only one potential setup. There's a lot of different setups that you could run, a lot of different sets that you could run depending on the specific trial, the specific content, your specific group. So I will be going over all of those different combinations in turn. So starting off first with our Monster Helm sets, we are going with Symphony of Blades. Easily one of the strongest Monster Helm sets in the game for support roles. It is definitely a set you want to pick up. This comes from Depths of Meltar, so you do need to have access to the Resto DLC in order to grab this set. So I do have one heavy and one medium piece here. I like to go with 511 on my healers just for additional stats from the Undaunted passive, but you can also go with any combination of light armor and heavy armor as well. So you can go 6 light, 1 heavy, or all light if you so desire. Just keep in mind that if you do decide to go 6-1 or 7-0, you will have a little bit less max health because you are losing some percentages from the Undaunted passive. So for me, I like to go 5-1-1 because I find this thing to be fairly easy to do. My healer is a Dark Elf on live, and I still find it fairly easy to sustain my max Magicka, so I don't really see a need to run 6-1 or even 7-0 light, but depending on kind of how you want to approach healing, you might want to get a little bit more sustain by having more light armor pieces. And then for our body set here, we have Perfected Olorime. Olorime has pretty much completely overtaken Spell Power Cure as the main source of major courage. So I had the perfect version here, so this drops from Vet Cloud Rest +1, +2, or +3. +0 will only give you the weapons, and you do want to have this on the body if you can, because you want to maintain that Magicka, max Magicka bonus on the 5-piece whenever whenever you can. Now, you can go with the imperfect version of Olorime. That's perfectly fine as well. It's basically whichever one version of the set that you're able to obtain. So again, perfect comes from Vet Cloud Rest +1, 2, or 3, but you can get the normal versions from defeating any of the side bosses or normal Cloud Rest in any configuration. And our second set's going to be Infallible Aether. This is a base game set. This comes from any of the 3 Craglorn trials, so pretty easy to obtain. So we do have the jewelry pieces here as well as weapons. So pretty standard, cut and dry. This is really nice to have as in support set because of that additional minor vulnerability that you get when you do a heavy attack. Now, the heavy attack does not need to be fully charged in order to get that minor vulnerability buff, so it's very easy to apply minor vulnerability to multiple enemies at a time. It does last for 10 seconds, so you can run this on the back bar exclusively and have a unique restoration staff on your front bar if you so desire. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a few seconds here. So again, this is only one particular setup. You will want to have several other sets on hand to swap out based on what your other healer is running and the content that you're running as well. So we'll be going through these in alphabetical order here, and we'll be using Monster Helm sets last, and we're talking about unique restoration staffs also at the very end. So first set that you're going to want to have on hand here, I need to pick it up actually from the medium dungeon set, and it's going to be an interesting set here. It's going to be Hircine Veneer. So this is a medium armor set from Selene's Web. It's a base game set, and the 5-piece reduces the cost of stamina abilities by 4% for you and up to 11 other group members within 28 meters of you. So because it is a medium armor set, you're going to want to run jewelry and weapons. So if you run Hircine's Veneer, you cannot run a unique restoration staff on your front part here. You pretty much have to double bar Hircine's in order to maintain that 4% cost reduction to stamina abilities. Now, you will obviously need to transmute the jewelry, so as part of running Hircine's Veneer, you need to have access to the Somerset expansion so you can actually transmute the jewelry into Arcane to best fit what you want, or Infused if you decide to go the Infused route here. But Hircine's is very, very nice for stamina DPS. If you're in a group with pretty much no stamina DPS, then Hircine's Veneer is not going to be nearly as strong, and you will not need to wear this set. So just keep that in mind when you take a look at your group composition, whether you need to get Hircine's Veneer. Moving on down the line, first set here is going to be Healing a Mage. So this is a light armor set from the Aetherian Archive trial. It's also known as Mending because all of the armor pieces have Mending rather than Healing Mage. The 5-piece, when you use an area of effect heal ability, you reduce the weapon damage of all enemies within 10 meters of you by 430 for 3 seconds. Now while it does say weapon damage, it affects all damage from PvE mobs because PvE mobs only use one statistic to calculate out their damage. Really, really nice for progression guilds as long as you are able to be within that 10-meter radius. Pretty much all heals in the game, with very few exceptions, are considered area of effect heals, so it's really easy to get really good uptime on the Mending debuff. Again, really nice for progression guilds, not going to be used too much in sort of score guilds or speed runs, mainly because it doesn't really provide any sort of DPS, but it does provide a lot of survivability, hence why progression guilds typically will have Healing Mage on one of their healers. We already talked about Infallible Mage, very strong set here. Jorvuld's Guidance is the next set. This is a light armor set from Scalecaller Peak, so this is a dungeon set. You need to have access to the Dragon Bones DLC in order to grab this set here. The 5-piece increases the duration of all major buffs, minor buffs, and damage shields you apply to yourself and allies by 40%. So very nice for increasing your buffs, so it increases the duration of your minor sorcery buff, it increases the duration of any other buffs that you might give out to your allies. But the main reason why you want to use Jorvuld's Guidance is because it also buffs the major force uptime from using Warhorn. It gets a little bit more burst by having greater major force uptime, so that's the reason why we want to use Jorvuld's Guidance here. Moving on next to, again, we're going to be skipping the unique restoration staffs, and we will be skipping the Monster Helm sets. We are going to be talking about next, we already talked about Perfected Vestments of Olorime, really strong set. There's really no reason to run Spell Power Cure if you have Olorime. The only reason to run Spell Power Cure is if you don't have access to the Somerset expansion. Next we have Eye of Nahviintaas. This is the perfect version here. This is a light armor set that comes with a new trial Sunspire, so you do need to have access to Elsweyr if you want to grab this set here. Fairly interesting set, so it gives you Magicka regen, minor Aegis, max Magicka. The perfect version gives you another set bonus of max Magicka. In the 5-piece, when an ally activates one of your synergies, you and the ally who activated the synergy get 12% cost reduction for non-ultimate abilities for 3 seconds. This effect can occur every 6 seconds per target. So this is very strong for sustain. Now, when it first came out, a lot of people were comparing this to Worm or Hircine's Veneer, but as Heals the Fields, a very good endgame player, endgame healer, pointed out, it's not necessarily the only instance where you're going to be using Eye of Nahviintaas. You can also pair Eye of Nahviintaas with Worm and with Hircine to basically double up on the cost reduction. So if you take that into consideration, Eye of Nahviintaas is actually a fairly nice set to run. You will pretty much always have that cost reduction because it's whenever it activates one of your synergies, so you will always have that cost reduction, or pretty much will have very good uptime on that cost reduction, and the cost reduction is fairly high. It's 12% cost reduction, which is an effective 6% when you account for the potential uptime, which is a pretty strong, especially when you pair it with something like Worm or Hircine, as Heals the Fields points out. We have Sanctuary here, so this is a light armor set from Banished Cell, so again a dungeon set base game. The 5-piece increases the healing received by 12% for you and up to 11 group members within 10 meters of you. Very niche scenario where you're going to be using Sanctuary. It's really limited by the fact that it has a 10-meter radius, and also by the fact that it's fairly easy to overheal in this game. Again, overhealing is when the healing you do is more than the healing that is needed. So if somebody's missing 2,000 health and your healing springs hit them, just an example here, hit them for 4,000 healing, you basically wasted 2,000 of your healing. That is considered overhealing, and it's very easy to do that in this game. So the healing received buff is not really all that useful in most scenarios. Now there are going to be some fights where Sanctuary is very, very useful. For example, Cloud Rest in order to combat Baneful Mark from Zamaja and Execute, but outside of those niche scenarios, Sanctuary is not a particularly strong set. Now the final set we want to talk about is going to be the Worm's Raiment. This is another base game set from Vaults of Madness, so another dungeon set. It's basically the Magicka version of Hircine's Veneer. Reduces the cost of your Magicka abilities by 4% for you and up to 11 group members within 28 meters of you. Now, conversely to Hircine's Veneer, if you have all stamina DPS, Worm is obviously not as strong. So only really use this if you have a sufficient number of Magicka DPS in order to, take advantage of that cost reduction for your Magicka abilities. Pretty strong sustain tool for Magicka DPS. Now, in terms of armor traits, enchants, jewelry traits, enchants, and weapon traits and enchants. Oh, before we go into that, Monster Helm sets, before I forget. So you have a couple of different Monster Helm sets. We already talked about Symphony of Blades, but there are a few other sets if you want to go for a more healing oriented Monster Helm set. We have Bogdan, the Night Flame. This comes from Elden Hollow 2, so a base game Monster Helm set, and one of the best Monster Helm sets in the game for raw healing potential. So when you heal a friendly target, you have 5% chance to summon a totem for 6 seconds that heals you and your allies within 5 meters for, in this case, 4165 health every second. So, even though it only says a 5% chance to summon a totem, it is on each individual heal. So, for example, if you hit 6 people with healing springs, that is 6 individual 5% chances in order to proc Bogdan. So you can actually get a really nice uptime on Bogdan if you're using these sort of AoE style heals. Really, really nice, and again, one of the strongest healing-oriented Monster Helm sets in the game. Next, we have Sun of Rkugamz, which combines both a healing aspect as well as a support aspect as well. This comes from Darkshade Caverns 1, another base game Monster Helm set, pretty easy to obtain. When you heal yourself or an ally, you have a 10% chance to summon a Dwemer Spider that heals for 1254 health and restores 524 stamina to you and your allies within 5 meters within every 1 second for 8 seconds. So again, nice heal, 1254, so obviously a little bit lower than Bogdan, but it does also restore stamina. So very nice to have in stack and burn fights where you have a lot of stamina and DPS. It just helps out the sustain by a really nice margin here. So going to be limited in its overall applicability, but where it can be applied, it is a very strong sustain set on top of the additional healing as well. Already talked about Symphony, very nice sustain bonus. So whenever you heal an ally who's under 50% of their primary resource, you give them Meridia's Favor. Super, super nice, especially when you have multiple support roles running Symphony of Blades. You cannot practice on yourself, unfortunately, but it is a very nice sustain for whoever it does happen to proc on, whether that's a tank, another healer, or a DPS. Next we have Troll King, which is probably a very niche set here. So when you heal yourself or an ally, if they are still below 50% health, their health with regen is increased by 1548 for 10 seconds. This comes from Blessed Crucible, so another base game Monster Helm set that you might want to pick up. Now, this is obviously a very niche use set, so again, like I mentioned earlier, it's very easy to overheal in this game. So you still need to be below 50% health after you activate a heal. However, in these scenarios where you want to use Troll King, Cloud Rest for example, you are pretty much always going to be at below that 50% threshold in those instances. So with Baneful Mark, for example, it gives you a pretty hefty healing debuff. The health regen that you get from the Troll King proc is not affected by Baneful Mark, so it is a very strong set to use there. In Lakesti's hard mode, the Ice Prison also puts a healing debuff, so your first heal is obviously going to keep them below 50% health, and then health regen is unaffected by the debuff, so it just gives them a very nice additional heal that way. So Troll King, very situationally useful, but in those situations where it is useful, it is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And finally, before we go over traits and enchants, are unique healers sets. Those are your Master's Restoration Staff, if I can find it. Master's Restoration Staff here, and then you have the Maelstrom Restoration Staff, and then you have the Asylum's Restoration Staff. I can find it. Here it is. So starting off with the perfected Asylum Restoration Staff. Whenever you cast Blessing of Protection, also known as Combat Prayer, the cost of your Magicka and Stamina healing abilities are reduced by 30% for 3 seconds. It is reduced by 27% if you have the regular version of this staff. Basically gives you a little bit of additional sustain. You can just do Comet Prayer, Orbs, and your Orbs will be 27 or 30% cheaper. It's a really nice overall sustain bonus here. Now the Master's Restoration Staff, the initial heal of Grand Healing / Healing Springs or Illustrious Healing, restores 258 stamina to you and allies affected. So very nice sustain tool if you have a lot of stamina DPS. That being said, the Master Restoration Staff has lost quite a bit of power because Healing Springs is not going to be your primary heal. It's going to be Orbs, so Masters is not quite as strong as it used to be back when Healing Springs was a really strong heal. Finally, we have the Maelstrom Restoration Staff. So this comes from the Maelstrom Arena, so you do need to have access to the Hircine DLC in order to get this set. When you critically heal with Regeneration, also known as Mutagen or Rapid Regen, you restore 800 Magicka. This effect can occur once every 4 seconds. Going to be very situationally useful. It's very similar to Troll King. Mutagen and Rapid Regen are typically skills that you do not normally use in trials. However, in some instances, you might want to use them. So as the Kite Healer, for example, in Cloud Rest, you will be using Rapid Regen or Mutagen as a heal over time. In those instances, having the Maelstrom Restoration Staff can really help with the overall sustain. So it kind of fits in that same boat with the Asylum Restoration Staff in the fact that it helps out your sustain a little bit more selfish there. Now we can talk about traits and enchants. So for our armor, I like to go with Infused on my large pieces with Prismatic enchants, and then Divines on my small pieces with Max Magicka enchants. It's up to you whether you want to go Divines on your large pieces as well, but I like Infused just to give my Prismatic enchants a little bit of a stronger effect. For our jewelry traits and enchants, you have a few options here. So you can go with Arcane. Arcane is a really nice trait to run for healers, just gives you more Max Magicka, better sustain, more healing strength. Then for enchants, you have 2 main options. You have Magicka Regen, or you can have Spell Power. So go over to the enchanting table here and go ahead and make, I want to spell damage, that's here. So you can see here spell damage adds 174 spell damage, and then the regen glyphs adds 169 Magicka Regen. And these of course are affected by buffs and things like that. Now, the general rule of thumb that I typically go for is I try to get up to around 2000 Magicka Regen and as close as I can to 2000 spell damage as well when I have no buffs. So with buffs, obviously these will go up, but this is kind of the goal that I shoot for. Now, depending on the set that you're running, they all have different set bonuses. So, for example, Jorvuld's Guidance has 2 Magicka Regen components behind it. Infallible Aether has 1 spell damage component behind it. Olorime has 2 Magicka Regen components behind it. So, your enchants might end up changing depending on the specific sets that you are running. You might need to run a little bit more Regen glyphs. You might need to run more spell damage glyphs. So, you just keep that in mind. Again, my personal goal is always around 2000 for Magicka Regen and spell damage before any buffs. If you want, you can also run Infused to help you get to those goals, so that just boosts the power of your enchants there. You will be giving up some Max Magicka though, so you will be losing out on some healing strength as well as some sustain. Now for our weapons, you have a few options when it comes to the Restoration Staff bar. I like to go with Infused, but you can also go with Powered. That's another very popular choice among healers. Those are going to be the 2 most common choices that you see. You can also see things like Nirn Tone for additional damage, spell damage, which does end up boosting your overall heals as well. Not quite as much as Powered, but still a nice boost overall. I've also seen Defending to help out with just overall survivability, mostly for progression style groups. I've also seen Decisive for better ultimate generation. But the 2 ones that I've seen used most often are Powered and Infused. For front bar enchants, you can run either weapon damage enchant for the additional spell damage, or you can run Absorb Magicka for the additional sustain. Again, those are the 2 most popular enchants that I have seen. I've also seen Crusher on the front bar, although that's usually reserved for the back bar instead. We'll see right here. So the Lightning Staff back bar is infused with a Crusher enchant. And that's just because you would typically be having Blockade, and it's easier to maintain that Crusher enchant when you have Blockade down versus the front bar where you will have to weave in order to get your enchants going. So for the actual trait itself, it's pretty much always going to be infused. For the enchant, you can do Pressure, you can run Weakening, you can even run things like Weapon Damage or Absorb Magicka. The idea behind this is a lot of groups are moving Crusher to the healers, but it can still be used on a tank. So it really depends on which support role is actually going to be responsible for Crusher. Now, one other thing I want to mention here while we're on the Crusher enchant is the fact that you might need to run Torug's Pact. The Torug's Pact is a crafted set. It is a 3-piece set from the base game, and it increases your potency of your enchant by 30%. Now, this is usually, or typically, it is sometimes worn by the tank. However, in really optimized groups, Torug's Pact will be put on the healer instead, because tanks will be wearing Nahviintaas, Alkosh, Ebon, and Powerful Assault, or some other set like that. So Torug's Pact has kind of been shifted over here to the healer side of things in place of something like Worm or Jorvuld's Guidance. So just keep that in mind. You might want to hold on to a set of Torug's Pact here if you are responsible for the Crusher enchants. So if it's still on the tanks in your group, you don't have to run Torug's Pact, but if it is not on the tanks, then you might need to run it instead. Moving on to our character sheet, I am a Breton. Bretons are going to be one of the strongest races in the game for healing. They get 2000 max Magicka, they get some nice spell resistance, and they get 7% cost reduction to all Magicka based abilities. A really nice sustained bonus there. Other potential options include pretty much all the Magicka DPS races. So Altmer, Dunmer are two good strong choices there. They get the 258 spell damage for increased healing strength. High Elves get 2000 Magicka. Dark Elves get 1875 Magicka. You can also go with Argonians. Argonians do get a healing done bonus to their passive bonus. They get a nice potion passive, so whenever you drink a potion, you get 4000 Magicka health and stamina, so nice for your overall sustain. Plus, they get a little bit of max health. I believe it's 1000 max health and 1000 max Magicka, so a little bit of additional resource sustain there as well. But generally speaking, Bretons are going to be one of the strongest races to go for. In terms of attributes, all points are going into Magicka here. For our Mundustone, we're going with the Atronach for the additional Magicka regen. You can also go with the Ritual for additional healing done. That will allow you to spec a little bit less into Magicka regen. It allows you to spec less into spell damage if you're running the Ritual and more into Magicka regen. Conversely, if you're running the Atronach, you can spec a little bit less into Magicka regen and a little bit more into spell damage. And then for food, we are running Clockwork Citrus Fillet. We get the max health, we get the max Magicka, and we get the Magicka regen. So the max health and max Magicka has been nerfed in Elsweyr, but the regen did get buffed a little bit, so still one of the best foods to run for healers. The other option is to run either Bystat food or Orzgar's Red Frothgars. Those are the two other options that you do have as a healer in terms of food. Now for our skills, we do have a few flex spots, and very similar to the sets, we will be talking about each of the different abilities you're going to want to have on hand. You're starting with our Restoration Staff bar, Ritual of Rebirth, Illustrious Healing, Comet Prayer, Overflowing Altar, Extended Ritual, and Solar Prison. Here we have Overflowing Altar as a flex, arguably. Then we have Solar Prison as a flex as well. For Illustrious Healing, you can go with the other morph if you so desire. Healing Springs. I really don't find an issue sustaining Illustrious Healing, but if you do have issues sustaining it, you can swap over to Healing Springs instead. For our Destruction Staff bar, we have... Oh wait, hold on. Missing an ability here on one of my bars here, so I'm actually going to plop this here and do a little bit of magic. Alright, so we actually have energy orbs here instead of Overflowing Altar, so my mistake there. I was playing around with the bars a little bit earlier. Then for our back bar, this is the Destruction Staff bar. We have Luminous Shards, Elemental Drain, Power of the Light, Channeled Focus, and Blockade of Storms, and then we have Aggressive Warhorn. So on the back bar here, again, a few flex spots. Blockade is arguably a flex spot if, for example, your tank is responsible for maintaining Crusher uptimes. Ele Drain is not needed on both healers. Sometimes only one healer runs it, but it is best to have both healers run it there, so that way you don't ever lose uptime on that minor Magicka steal. And then Power of the Light, if you do have a Stamina Templar DPS, then you obviously don't need to run Power of the Light. That's typically speaking going to be part of their rotation, although it really depends on the specific build that your Templar is running. Power of the Light is resulting in a little bit of a DPS loss for Stamina Templars, so might be shifted over to healers instead. The debuff was buffed, the duration of the debuff I should say was buffed up to 9 seconds from 6 seconds in Elsweyr, so a little bit easier to maintain that minor fracture, minor breach from Power of the Light now. So we do have a few flex spots here. So first flex spot is probably going to be Ritual of Rebirth here. So you do have a few abilities you can put on there. Breath of Life is the other burst heal that Templars have. You can pick either of these two. Breath of Life is a single target heal which only goes directly in front of you, versus Ritual of Rebirth, which is an AoE heal. So it is a 10 meter AoE heal, so a little bit stronger. It also heals more people when it comes to compared to Breath of Life. That being said, Breath of Life is cheaper than Ritual of Rebirth, so just keep that in mind when you pick which one you want to go for. We already talked a little bit about potentially running mutagen on certain trials. It's very useful in 4-man dungeons, so definitely an ability you might want to have on hand. Healing Ward is another potential set you want to hold on to, or learn I should say, mainly because there may be an instance or two where you're going to want to run the Black Rose Prison Restoration Staff, which does buff Healing Ward. Not very often you're going to be seeing this used. It's only really going to be used in potentially Lakesti's hard mode against the Ice Prison in Sunspire, and maybe Cloud Rest to deal with Baneful Mark. But those are the only two fights where you might see Healing Ward combined with the Black Rose Prison Restoration Staff being used. If you want a shield, you can also use the Light Armor Shield, Depth Magic, or Harness Magicka. You can also use the Sun Shield morph, either of them in the Adric Spear line, either Radiant Ward or Blazing Shield. And then from there, Circular Protection is an ability you're going to want to have on hand. It just gives out minor protection within a nice little AoE. I prefer the Ring of Preservation morph here. It's really going to be used only in a handful of fights. Again, when you're stacked up and you need mitigation. So for example, Assembly General and Hall of Fabrication is one instance where you might want to have this on hand. Not going to be used in all fights, but it's just nice to have that option there. Under the Undaunted line, pretty much all these abilities are going to be flex, with the exception of Energy Orbs. You definitely want to keep this on there because this is going to be your strongest heal. Overflowing Altar, you want at least one support role to run Overflowing Altar for the minor lifesteal as well as the Blood Feast synergy. Typically speaking, it'll be put on a healer because the lifesteal heal does scale off of things like minor mending, major mending, but you can put this on a tank if the healers don't have space on their bars. Shadow Silk for the additional synergy to help out your DPS. It was nerfed a little bit in Elsweyr, but it's still a very nice synergy. It's basically free damage, so might as well put it on there if you have the space. Bone Surge, less for the shield, more for the major vitality. Going to be situationally useful for those instances where you do need additional healing power. And we already talked about Energy Orbs. That's not really a flex spot here. And under the support role, make sure you have Efficient Purge in those fights where you do need the cleanse. So this is just a more consistent cleanse compared to using the Purify synergy from Extended Ritual. Alright, so moving on next to our CP point distributions. The CP cap is still 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of our 3 different constellation types. Starting off with our green CPs, 100 Arcanist, 75 in Tenacity. That leaves 95 points, which you can put into the remaining nodes really however you'd like. So 31 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, 33 Warlord. You can play around with your points here. For example, if you have no trouble sustaining, you can possibly drop Arcanist down to 75 and get back a couple of points. If you want, you can bump Tenacity all the way up to 100, so that way you can maximize the amount of Magicka you get back whenever you heavy attack. It's up to you how you want to do that. For our blue CPs, a lot of the blue CPs are centered more around DPS, less so around healing, so very straightforward here. 100 Blessed, 100 Elfborn. That's pretty much all you need. The remaining 70 points can split up really however you would like. So for example, I have here 49 LE Expert, 11 Spell Erosion, 10 Master at Arms. So again, the big things you want to make sure to hit, 100 Blessed, 100 Elfborn. Now for our red CPs, 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick Skin, 64 in the Hardy and Elemental Defender. This is kind of a one-size-fits-most approach, so this will give you pretty decent mitigation across all pieces of content. But if you want to maximize your mitigation across any single trial or 4-man content, you will need to shift CP points around a little bit. So for example, in Maul Florcage, you'll be taking a little bit more magic damage compared to physical damage, so you might want to shift points out of Hardy, put them into Elemental Defender and Spell Shield in order to maximize your mitigation that way. That is pretty much all of the build information. So now let's talk about the philosophy of healing. So healing, generally speaking, in ESO Fall, you have really 3 main things you want to accomplish. First one, make sure nobody dies. Pretty much the definition of a healer, just make sure you're healing people. Second responsibility is don't die yourself. Kind of tied to number 1, where you're healing other people, just make sure to also heal yourself. The third responsibility is basically provide support for your group. That's buffing your allies and debuffing the enemy to the best of your ability. That comes in both skills that you're using as well as sets that you're using. Olorime is a buffing set, Infallible Aether is a debuff set, for example. So once you have learned how to keep people up and keep yourself alive, mainly the goal behind healing is really supporting your allies. You're really more of a support role, less of a raw healing role. I know in other MMOs, the healer is pretty much all about healing, not really supporting or providing buffs or things like that. In ESO, it's very different. Healers are pretty much all about providing support. So your biggest 2 support moves are going to be Combat Prayer and Energy Orbs. These two moves are incredibly important for DPS. Comet Prayer for the Minor Berserk, all classes needed except for Wardens, and Energy Orb for the Combustion synergy, which returns resources to the allies. Energy Orb is also going to be one of your strongest heals that you can put out. So even after they use the Combustion synergy, it's still a very potent heal. So definitely try to make sure you have an Energy Orb out at all times, and try to make sure Comet Prayer is pretty much going down pretty much on cooldown. Now it will only hit 6 people, so both healers will be responsible for maintaining Comet Prayer on the DPS, but that doesn't mean you should be slacking at all and having your other healer do most of the work. Make sure that you are doing your part in maintaining that Minor Berserk uptime here. Beyond that, the next most important thing is going to be Power of the Light for the Minor Fracture, Minor Breach. It lasts for 9 seconds, so you do have a little bit of time to play around with it, but definitely want to maintain it if you don't have a Templar in group already running Power of the Light. Elemental Drain, if you're responsible for it, is really nice for Magicka DPS. For the Minor Magicka Steel, really helps out the sustain. But beyond that, everything else is pretty much on an as-needed basis. So, then a Ritual, you want to try to have that down because it's a really nice heal over time. Illustrious Healing or Healing Springs and Ritual Rebirth are more sort of bursty heals. So Illustrious Healing and Healing Springs can stack on each other, so you can stack up to 4 Illustrious Healings on top of each other, for a total of about 8,400 health per second. So Illustrious Healing is kind of a burst heal that has kind of a heal over time component associated with it. Ritual Rebirth is just raw burst heal. So these are going to be your main 2 burst heals. Comet Prayer is also a nice burst heal, not quite as strong as stacking Illustrious Healing. And Energy Orbs is going to be your strongest heal over time next to Extended Ritual. And then for Shards always go to the tank. Don't throw them on the DPS, throw them on the tank. That's because Orbs take time to get to your destination, and so your DPS might end up eating those Orbs when you really want the Shard on that tank right away. It also gives both Magicka and Stamina back, so a little bit more useful on the tank that way. If you're running Blockade, make sure to have that down in order to maintain your enchant uptime, and then you have Channel Focus. It's nice to keep this down as best you can for the regen, as well as the Major Ward, Major Resolve, but if you need to let it drop for a little bit. It's not that big of a deal. And obviously Warhorn for the additional Major Force, as well as the Max Magicka and Max Stamina resource bonus there. So it's really difficult for me to explain how to approach healing without actually showing you guys healing content. So I do have a few streams, older streams, where I was healing. I don't really heal all too often. I do recommend checking out other streamers who do heal full time. So for example, Tabata, Style Anima heals the fields. They're all really good resources to go for in terms of healing. I like to joke around that healing is my 4th best role. So me personally, I'm an okay healer, but I would not necessarily take my word as gospel when it comes to healing in ESO. So that is it for this build video. I will have links in the description below to those 3 healers that I mentioned. Heals the Fields, Tabata, Style Anima, as well as Sophie. And those are 4 streamers that pretty much heal full time, and they're a much better resource than I am when it comes to the intricacies behind healing in ESO. But if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. And if I can't answer them, I will try to find the answer for you guys. Again, I hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.